People say blood is thicker than water, but never mention how flammable it is. Watching my brother burn my medical scholarship worth hundreds of thousands of dollars while my parents smiled, they thought they chained me to their debts forever. Instead, that fire ignited a time bomb I had buried beneath this house for 8 months. When my plane wheels leave the runway, the only thing left of this family will be ashes. Hello to the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to operate, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and will transition our operations entirely to Patreon. If you find today's story compelling, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear even better, longer, and more detailed exclusive true stories that we cannot publish on YouTube. Featuring multiple emotional voice actors bringing every single moment to life, which you can access by simply scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link located in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story with our main character, Veronica French. It was exactly 11 o'clock at night when the sharp, undeniable sound of a striking lighter echoed through the cramped space of our family home. I stood silently, leaning against the chipped wooden doorframe of the kitchen, safely hidden under the bed in my room. My suitcase was already completely packed, zipped up, and waiting for the morning, but in this precise moment, my eyes were utterly transfixed on the stainless steel kitchen sink. My older brother, Julian, stood over it with a metallic silver lighter in his right hand, grinning with a twisted sense of victory as he held the flame to the thick parchment paper of my medical scholarship documents for one of the most prestigious medical schools in London. The cinematic slowness of the moment felt surreal. The acrid, heavy smell of burning ink and melting official wax seals aggressively filled the greasy air of the kitchen. I watched the bright orange flames reflect violently in Julian's dark, triumphant eyes. He held up the primary acceptance letter, letting the fire eat away at the corners. The thick paper curled, blackened, and hissed as the flames eagerly devoured the signature of the university dean. "You really thought you were going somewhere, didn't you?" Julian sneered, dropping the flaming upper half of the document into the damp metal basin where it gave off a pathetic sizzle. "You are just a girl born to be a cash machine for this family. You have absolutely no right to parade around in a pristine white coat like you are somehow better than the rest of us." Just a few feet away at the worn dining table, my mother, Diane, was casually dragging an emery board across her fingernails. The rhythmic, grating rasp of her filing intertwined sickeningly with the crackling of the burning paper. She did not even bother to look up at the destruction happening right in front of her. "That scholarship should have been converted into hard cash to help this family pay off our mounting debts," she stated, her voice dripping with a freezing, calculated indifference. Beside her, my father, Arthur, took a long, slow sip of his cheap beer and nodded his heavy head in complete agreement. "Your mother is right. You owe us your paycheck, not your delusions of grandeur," he grunted, dismissing my entire life's work with a lazy wave of his hand. They waited for the explosion. I could see the eager anticipation building in the rigid posture of my brother's broad shoulders. They fully expected me to fall to my knees, to scream wildly, to cry hysterically, to desperately claw at the hot ashes in the sink as my lifelong dreams literally went up in smoke. I stood perfectly still and watched the very last page of my official financial aid award letter disintegrate into fragile, weightless gray flakes. But absolutely no tears came. My heart did not race. My breathing remained frighteningly even. What my deeply cruel family did not know was that exactly 2 months ago, anticipating their sabotage, I had meticulously scanned every single page of those documents, digitized them into encrypted high-resolution files, and uploaded them directly to the university's secure online student portal. The papers currently burning in the sink were nothing more than ceremonial physical copies. A strange, profound sense of lightness suddenly washed over my chest, instead of begging or breaking down. I felt the corners of my mouth slowly curve upward. I smiled, It was a deeply relieved, bone-chillingly cold smile. In that exact fraction of a second, every single ounce of daughterly guilt, every misplaced sense of familial duty, and every lingering drop of toxic affection evaporated into the smoky air, just like the ashes of those papers. My conscience was finally, beautifully wiped clean. I turned on my heel and walked silently back toward my bedroom, letting the soft thud of my footsteps fade into the dark hallway. I left them standing there in the kitchen, gloating over a pile of worthless wet ash, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation. Tonight was not the night I lost my future. Tonight was the night my ruthless punishment for them officially began. To understand how I reached that point of absolute, chilling numbness in the kitchen, you have to understand the suffocating reality I had been trapped in for years. By day, I was a senior data analyst at Vanguard Omni Logistics. It sounds like a highly prestigious title, but in actual reality, it was a grueling, mind-numbing marathon. I analyzed global shipping routes and complex freight logistics until my vision literally blurred, grinding away for 60 hours every single week. My salary was undeniably generous, yet my bank account was constantly gasping for air. The reason was simple and utterly depressing. I was not working to build my own independent life. I was working to endlessly fund the delusions of the golden boy, my 32-year-old brother, Julian. Julian firmly fancied himself an elite entrepreneur. In his warped, narcissistic mind, he was a misunderstood business genius perpetually on the verge of his massive breakthrough. The truth was far more pathetic and incredibly expensive. He bounced aggressively between volatile cryptocurrency scams and shady imported goods that borderlined on illegal smuggling. He poured tens of thousands of dollars into imaginary internet coins that predictably plummeted to zero overnight. He bought massive shipping containers full of defective electronic cigarettes that were promptly confiscated by customs. Every single one of his phantom companies went spectacularly bankrupt, draining my parents of every cent of their retirement savings. But did they ever hold him accountable? Absolutely not. In the deeply entrenched, archaic logic of my parents, Julian could simply do no wrong. A son is the one who carries the family legacy forward, my father would sternly lecture me, jabbing a grease-stained finger in my direction whenever I dared to question Julian's latest financial disaster. You are just a girl. You will eventually get married and leave to serve another family. Your brother is the true foundation of this bloodline, because he was considered the foundation. I was heavily expected to be the concrete poured into his endless, gaping cracks. It was never a polite request. It was a vicious demand. When Julian threw a massive tantrum about needing to look successful to attract high-end investors, my mother cried hysterically until I agreed to co-sign and make the monthly installment payments on his absurdly flashy sports car. Every single month, $800 vanished from my hard-earned checking account to fund his matte black status symbol. I paid for the premium gas he burned while driving to nowhere. I paid for his overpriced organic groceries, his designer gym memberships, and the utility bills for the house. I barely had time to sleep in. I was nothing more than an automated teller machine made of flesh and bone, existing solely to dispense cash whenever Julian pressed the buttons. But while they bled me dry during the day, the night belonged entirely to me. They thought I was securely chained to the glowing screens of Vanguard Omni Logistics, analyzing data sets for overtime pay. But in the dead silence of the midnight hours, my monitors displayed something entirely different: organic chemistry, advanced human anatomy, cellular biology. For years, I quietly funneled every ounce of my remaining energy into a singular, desperate goal: escape. I studied relentlessly, hiding massive medical textbooks under the loose floorboards of my closet. I took the medical college admission test and the rigorous United Kingdom medical entry examinations in absolute secrecy, exhausted but deeply driven. When the results finally came back, I had scored in the 99th percentile, a flawless, perfect score. I had secured a full-ride scholarship to London without breathing a single word to the leeches living down the hall. I knew that if they found out I had a golden ticket out, they would immediately try to destroy it. However, The fiery destruction of my scholarship papers in the sink tonight was not the true catalyst of my hatred. The final, fragile shred of my familial loyalty had actually been severed exactly 8 months prior, during a profoundly sickening discovery. My late grandmother, the only person in this toxic family who ever looked at me with genuine warmth, had left me a vintage velvet box containing her antique jewelry collection. It was not just precious metal and stones, it was my only tangible connection to being truly loved. One evening, I came home from a brutal 12-hour shift to find my bedroom window shattered and the velvet box completely gone. My mother wailed loudly about a terrifying neighborhood burglary. My father filed a formal police report, swearing to the officers that he had chased a dark shadow out of the backyard. I spent agonizing days mourning the loss, feeling intensely violated and heartbroken. That was until exactly 2 weeks later, when I walked past a seedy pawnshop downtown and saw my grandmother's distinct emerald pendant hanging under the harsh fluorescent lights of the display case. I walked inside, completely numb, and asked the owner who had sold it to him. I did not even need to hear him describe the tall, arrogant man in his early 30s. He showed me the pawn ticket. There, printed in bold black ink, was Julian's full name and signature. I confronted my parents that exact same night, throwing the reclaimed pawn ticket onto the center of the dining table. I expected shock. I expected righteous rage directed at Julian. Instead, my mother looked away, acting highly defensive and deeply annoyed by my anger. "Your brother was in serious trouble with some very dangerous people," she snapped, not a single trace of remorse or guilt in her sharp voice. "It was just old metal. Veronica, family always comes first. You should be extremely grateful we found a way to keep him safe without bothering you for more cash." My father simply nodded along, sipping his drink as if sacrificing my most precious sentimental possession to cover Julian's gambling debts was a noble act of parenting. They had watched me cry real tears over their fake burglary and felt absolutely nothing. I stood in the center of the living room, staring at the three people who shared my DNA, and realized with crystal clarity that I was entirely alone in the world. They did not view me as a daughter or a sister. They viewed me as a disposable resource to be mined, exploited, and casually discarded when empty. The sick, twisted reality was that they would gladly strip the flesh right off my bones if it meant keeping Julian warm for one more night. I did not scream. I did not throw things. I simply picked up the crumpled pawn ticket, turned around, and walked back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed in the suffocating darkness and made a silent, unbreakable vow to myself. I would never let them drain another drop of life from me. I would not just walk away and let them find another victim. I would meticulously craft a plan to ensure they paid back every single ounce of pain they had inflicted upon me. The pawn ticket incident was the brutal severing of my emotional ties, but the true catalyst for my absolute, unyielding destruction of this family arrived on a completely unremarkable Tuesday afternoon, exactly 8 months ago. I was sitting at my dual-monitor desk at Vanguard Omni Logistics, buried under a mountain of supply chain spreadsheets, when my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the wood. It was an automated push notification from a credit monitoring application I had installed years ago and mostly forgotten about. The message was simple but terrifyingly urgent. A massive, high-risk inquiry had just been placed on my credit file, followed immediately by a notification of a newly opened commercial credit line. I stared at the glowing screen, my blood running completely cold. I had not applied for a single credit card or loan in over 4 years. Most people would have immediately called the customer service hotline and spent hours arguing with a confused representative. But I was a senior data analyst trained to track missing multi-million-dollar freight containers across complex global networks. I knew exactly how to hunt down digital footprints. As soon as the office emptied out at 6 o'clock in the evening, I locked the heavy glass door to my department. I bypassed the standard firewalls of my work computer and utilized Vanguard's proprietary deep web tracing software, a highly restricted tool meant exclusively for auditing international financial anomalies. I typed my own social security number into the query bar, hit enter, and watched the encrypted algorithms tear through global financial clearinghouses. What I found over the next 3 hours did not just break my heart, it made me want to burn the entire world to the ground. There, glowing ominously on my screen in harsh white text against a black background, was a corporate registry for a shell company named Apex Health Solutions. It had been officially incorporated in the state of Delaware exactly 2 weeks prior. The listed chief executive officer, the sole proprietor, and the primary financial guarantor was me. Someone had cleanly and ruthlessly stolen my social security number, my date of birth, and my pristine 99 percentile credit score to construct a fraudulent corporate entity. I traced the originating Internet Protocol address of the incorporation documents. It pinged directly back to the wireless router sitting in the living room of my family home. It was Julian. My golden boy brother had escalated from petty cryptocurrency scams to full-blown federal-level identity theft. The sheer scale of his operation was nauseating. Digging deeper into the encrypted ledgers, I discovered that Julian was not just opening credit cards to buy designer clothes. He was using my stolen identity to secure massive lines of commercial credit from highly illicit, black market medical equipment suppliers operating out of Eastern Europe. He was attempting to import counterfeit surgical tools and unverified medical devices to resell to shady independent clinics. The total outstanding debt attached to my name was staggering. He had borrowed hundreds of thousands of dollars from people who did not send polite collection letters in the mail. They sent men with broken noses and baseball bats. Julian was playing an incredibly dangerous game with international syndicates, and he had tied the explosive vest entirely to my chest. However, the mathematics of the situation simply did not make sense to me. A brand new shell company with absolutely no verifiable assets could not secure hundreds of thousands of dollars in illicit loans based purely on a good credit score. There had to be collateral, something tangible. I launched a secondary protocol, hacking directly into the digitized county property records, searching for anything tied to Apex Health Solutions. The system loaded a highly encrypted PDF file. It was a commercial mortgage and collateral agreement. As my eyes scanned the document, my stomach violently dropped. The collateral listed was a small, rustic wooden cabin located in the outer suburbs. It was the only asset of actual, tangible value our family possessed, a property that had been legally designated in my late grandfather's will to be transferred entirely to me upon my 30th birthday. I zoomed in aggressively on the final page of the contract, focusing on the guarantor's signature line. There, written in blue ink, was my name. But the handwriting was undeniably, unmistakably not mine. The sharp, erratic loop of the first letter and the heavy pressure on the ending consonants belonged to only one person: my father, Arthur. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the ribs. Julian could not have secured the cabin's deed on his own. My father had actively participated. My parents knew exactly what Julian was doing. When the shadow creditors had threatened Julian's life for capital, my father had willingly stepped in, forged my signature on a fraudulent deed of trust, and pledged my future property and my freedom to save his worthless son from being hunted down. They had sat around the dining room table, drinking cheap beer and filing their nails, while consciously conspiring to sell my identity to the criminal underworld. The sheer gravity of their betrayal was paralyzing. If Julian's counterfeit medical supply business collapsed, which it inevitably would, the black market creditors would not just foreclose on the cabin. The sudden financial implosion would inevitably trigger an automatic audit by the Internal Revenue Service and the federal government. The authorities would look at the paperwork, see my social security number, see my forged signature, and I would be the one dragged out of my office in handcuffs. I was facing up to 25 years in a federal penitentiary for commercial wire fraud, international smuggling, and aggravated identity theft, all for a crime I did not even know existed. My family had literally built a coffin for me and were happily hammering in the final nails. Most people would have stormed into the house that very night, screaming, crying, and threatening to call the police. But I was far beyond the realm of human emotion. I closed the investigation software, wiped my search history completely clean, and walked out of the Vanguard building with a terrifyingly clear mind. I did not say a single word to them when I got home. Instead, I used the next 8 months to transform myself into a ghost within my own house. I became a meticulous, cold-blooded spy. I secretly installed microscopic, undetectable spyware on Julian's personal laptop, capturing every single keystroke, every encrypted email, and every desperate message he sent to his offshore suppliers. I woke up at exactly 4 o'clock in the morning every single day to intercept the mail, carefully photographing my father's bank statements and the fraudulent loan notices before meticulously sealing the envelopes back together so they would never suspect a thing. I installed hidden, motion-activated micro cameras in the living room and the kitchen, capturing audio of their hushed, late-night conversations discussing the shell company and laughing about how incredibly stupid I was for working so hard while they used my name to get rich. For 240 agonizing days, I smiled warmly at them over dinner. I paid the utility bills. I co-signed the maintenance checks for Julian's sports car. I played the role of the obedient, clueless cash machine to absolute perfection. But in the shadows, I was quietly compiling terabytes of irrefutable, damning evidence. I backed up every single IP address, every forged document, every wire transfer receipt, and every audio confession onto a single, military-grade encrypted hard drive. I was not just preparing to leave for medical school in London. I was meticulously crafting a flawless, inescapable guillotine. I packaged the drive along with a comprehensive, 200-page analytical report, completely ready to be handed over to the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They thought they had buried me under their debt, but they had absolutely no idea that I was simply planting the explosives beneath their feet. Exactly 48 hours before my scheduled departure for London, the invisible countdown clock in my head shifted from a slow tick to a deafening, rapid thud. Every single second moving forward was meticulously calculated, leaving absolutely no margin for error. The air around me felt suffocating, thick with the electric tension that precedes a devastating storm. My first objective was severing the corporate tether. I calmly walked into the Human Resources Department of Vanguard Omni Logistics and placed my official letter of immediate resignation flat on the polished glass desk. I did not offer the standard 2 weeks of notice, nor did I provide a forwarding address. I simply dropped my electronic access badge next to the paper, turned my back on the grueling 60-hour work weeks, and walked out into the brisk morning air. For the very first time in years, my lungs actually felt full. Sitting in the driver's seat of my car in the company parking lot, I pulled out my laptop and initiated the Great Financial Purge. I logged into my highly secured banking portal and executed a series of international wire transfers. I watched with immense, profound satisfaction as tens of thousands of dollars, every single cent of my hard-earned life savings, vanished from American soil and instantly materialized in a heavily encrypted offshore account based in the United Kingdom. I was now entirely outside the legal jurisdiction of local creditors and completely out of reach of my family's greedy, parasitic hands. With my own assets secured, it was time to systematically dismantle the luxurious safety net I had unknowingly woven for them. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I accessed the primary account dashboards. With a few swift, merciless clicks, I permanently locked down and canceled the 4 premium credit cards my parents and Julian used to comfortably fund their daily existence. I did not just pause the accounts. I reported them as permanently closed and destroyed. Next, I navigated to the health and life insurance provider portal. For over 5 years, I had been quietly paying the exorbitant monthly premiums that covered my mother's expensive designer medications and my father's comprehensive life insurance policy. I selected the termination option, officially canceling their coverage effective at exactly midnight. If my father experienced a medical emergency tomorrow, or if my mother needed a prescription refill, they would be staring down the barrel of full retail prices with absolutely zero financial support. Returning to the house that afternoon, the bitter, acrid smell of burnt paper from the night before still faintly tainted the hallway. Julian had been so incredibly smug, so visibly high on his own perceived power when he tossed those ashes into the kitchen trash can. What his arrogant, painfully small mind failed to comprehend was that I am a senior data analyst. I specialize in identifying and eliminating single points of failure. The documents he had gleefully incinerated in the sink were nothing more than high-quality, theatrical replicas. I had spent hours printing them at the office using heavy textured stock paper, even going so far as to melt red wax to mimic the university seal. The actual, authentic acceptance letter, bearing the genuine watermark and the legitimate ink signature of the dean, was never in the house. I had securely handed it over in a sealed manila envelope to Dr. Elias, my elderly next-door neighbor and the retired surgeon, who had secretly mentored me through my medical entrance exams. Over 1 week prior, I was keeping my future locked safely inside his heavy, fireproof iron safe until my plane landed in London. Julian had burned absolutely nothing but his own pathetic delusions of control. At exactly 7 o'clock that evening, we sat down around the worn wooden table for what would be our final family dinner. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, choked by their usual arrogance and my silently suppressed anticipation. My mother served a cheap, overly salted casserole while complaining loudly about the rising cost of utilities, pointedly glaring at me as if she expected me to pull out my checkbook right then and there. Sitting directly across from me, Julian was practically vibrating with unearned, arrogant confidence. He aggressively swirled his glass of expensive red wine, a bottle I had unwittingly paid for just days ago. "You know, Veronica, you should really pay closer attention to how I operate," Julian boasted loudly, leaning back in his chair with a sickening, condescending grin spreading across his face. "I am finalizing a massive international business deal tomorrow morning. The final shipment of goods is clearing port customs as we speak. By this time next week, I am going to be a multimillionaire. Maybe, if you fix your terrible attitude and learn some respect, I will hire you to be my personal assistant so you do not have to wash dishes." How was, of course, talking about the black market medical equipment shipment he had illegally ordered using my stolen social security number and the fraudulently signed cabin deed. He genuinely believed he was mere hours away from total, undisputed victory. I looked him dead in the eye, took a slow, deliberate bite of my food, and forced the warmest, most genuine smile I could possibly muster onto my face. "I am absolutely certain tomorrow will be a profoundly life-changing day for you, Julian," I said softly, my voice perfectly steady and sweet. "You have worked so incredibly hard for this exact moment. You truly deserve everything that is coming to you." My father chuckled loudly, raising his damp beer bottle in the air. "See? That is the exact kind of respect your brother deserves. It is about time you finally learned your place in the hierarchy of this house." I excused myself early from the table and retreated to my bedroom, sitting in the dark to wait out the agonizingly slow, silent hours of the night. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, when the entire house was completely still, save for the heavy, drunken snoring of my father echoing down the narrow hallway, I quietly pushed my door open. I crept back out into the center of the dining room. I stood silently next to the table where we had eaten just hours before. Reaching into the large front pocket of my dark sweater, I pulled out a thick, heavy, bright red folder. I placed it precisely in the center of the wooden table, right in the exact spot where Julian always threw his sports car keys. Inside that glowing crimson folder was the ultimate, explosive culmination of my 8 months of silent, agonizing suffering. It contained thick, printed copies of the comprehensive Federal Bureau of Investigation dossier I had officially submitted to the Financial Crimes Division. It contained the undeniable, high-resolution photographic proof of the forged mortgage signature on the cabin deed. Most importantly, it contained a legally binding cease and desist order drafted by a ruthless corporate attorney I had retained, formally and permanently, severing all my legal and financial ties to them. It was not just a collection of printed papers sitting in the dark. It was a meticulously crafted, inescapable death sentence, waiting patiently for the morning sun to rise and trigger the execution. At exactly 5 o'clock in the morning, the air outside was biting and cold, carrying the quiet stillness of a world that had not yet woken up. I stood on the cracked concrete porch of the house for the very last time. My heavy suitcase was gripped firmly in my right hand, the wheels resting silently on the welcome mat. I did not look back. I simply reached out, pulled the heavy wooden door shut, and listened to the sharp, definitive click of the deadbolt sliding into place. It was the sound of a permanent severance. The drive to the international terminal was a blur of streetlights and empty highways. When I finally stepped through the massive sliding glass doors of the airport, the chaotic, overwhelming noise of thousands of rushing travelers washed over me. Announcements echoed loudly over the intercom system. Wheels clattered aggressively against the polished tile floors, and stressed families shouted at each other across the check-in counters. Yet, standing in the middle of that swirling tornado of human anxiety, my mind was perfectly, beautifully still. For the first time in my entire existence, I felt utterly untouchable. I bypassed the massive economy lines and made my way directly to the private premium boarding lounge, a quiet, softly lit sanctuary reserved strictly for first-class international passengers. The atmosphere in the lounge was completely removed from the chaos outside. Soft jazz played quietly from hidden speakers. The air smelled of expensive espresso and fresh pastries. I found a secluded leather armchair nestled beside a massive floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the sprawling tarmac. Outside, massive jet engines were spinning to life, preparing to carry me thousands of miles across the ocean. I ordered a cup of black tea from a passing attendant, set it carefully on the glass table, and pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. It was exactly 6:30 in the morning. Back at the house, they would just be waking up, groggy and entirely oblivious to the apocalyptic storm that was about to rip their lives apart. I opened my contact list, took one deep, incredibly satisfying breath, and pressed the call button for the landline in the kitchen. It rang loudly, the sharp digital tone echoing in my ear. One ring, two rings, three rings, finally. The receiver was fumbled off the wall hook. "Hello?" My father, Arthur, grumbled into the phone. His voice was thick with sleep and the lingering exhaustion of cheap alcohol from the night before. In the background, I could hear the distinct sound of my mother shuffling across the linoleum floor in her slippers, followed by Julian loudly yawning as he pulled out a wooden dining chair. "Good morning, Arthur," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any familial warmth. There was a brief pause. "Veronica, where are you? Your car is not in the driveway, and why are you calling the house phone?" "I am sitting at the airport, preparing to board a one-way flight to London," I replied calmly. "But before my plane leaves the runway, I need you to do something for me. I need you to walk over to the dining room table." "What are you talking about?" Julian's voice suddenly cut in, echoing loudly in the background. "Did she run away? Good riddance. Tell her to wire me the money for the utility bills before she disappears." "Walk to the table, Arthur," I repeated, my tone dropping to a sharp, commanding, icy whisper. "Look at the center of the table." I listened intently to the rustling sounds over the receiver. I could hear my father's heavy footsteps moving slowly across the kitchen floor. Then, I heard the sharp intake of breath from my mother. "There is a red folder sitting here," my father muttered, his voice laced with sudden, uneasy confusion. "Open it," I commanded. I sat back in my plush leather chair, sipping my warm tea, and closed my eyes to fully absorb the auditory masterpiece unfolding thousands of miles away. I heard the thick cardboard cover of the red folder flip open. I heard the crisp rustle of heavy printer paper. Then, there was silence. It was not a brief, casual pause. It was a prolonged, suffocating, terrifying silence. It was the exact sound of three arrogant, parasitic people simultaneously realizing they had been completely outplayed. "What is this?" my mother asked, her voice suddenly trembling. "Arthur, what does this mean? Why does this paper have a Federal Bureau of Investigation seal on it?" "Keep reading," I said brightly into the phone. "That first document is a highly detailed, 200-page investigative dossier. I compiled every single fraudulent wire transfer, every black market email, and every single illegally signed contract Julian used to build his little imaginary medical supply empire, using my social security number. I submitted the entire package to the Financial Crimes Division 3 days ago. Turn to page 4. Arthur, you will especially love page 4. More rustling, then A sharp, choked gasp from my father. That is a high-resolution scan of the commercial mortgage deed for the cabin, I explained, my voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. You will notice that the guarantor signature is completely forged. I also attached the sworn statement from the handwriting analyst I hired last month, proving definitively that it was your hand holding the pen. Arthur, you committed federal wire fraud to protect your precious son. Veronica! You listen to me right now! Julian suddenly screamed, snatching the receiver away from my father. His voice had lost every single ounce of its smug superiority. He sounded like a cornered, terrified animal. You call them right now and tell them you made a mistake. You tell them you authorized those loans. If they look into this, the people I borrowed money from will kill me, and the feds will lock me away. The credit cards are declining, my mother suddenly shrieked in the background, panic completely consuming her. I just tried to log into the banking application, and it says all our accounts are permanently closed. The insurance policies are gone. We have nothing. Veronica, please, my father begged, his voice shaking violently as he took the phone back. The arrogant patriarch, who had demanded my absolute obedience just 12 hours ago, was now weeping into the receiver. We are your family. We are your blood. Sometimes a family has to make deep sacrifices for each other to survive. You cannot do this to us. We will lose the house. I will go to jail. You made your sacrifices. Arthur, I replied, my voice echoing like cold steel. Now it is time for the harvest. I took one final sip of my tea and set the cup down. Julian, I highly recommend you put some solid shoes on. I anonymously tipped off the Port Authority and federal agents about your incoming black market shipment. They are going to kick down the doors of your storage warehouse in exactly 10 minutes. Oh, and Arthur? The monthly mortgage payment for the house is due next Tuesday. You are entirely on your own for that. No, wait, Veronica, I am begging you, Julian screamed into the background, his voice cracking wildly. I smiled, looking out the massive window as my airplane slowly taxied toward the gate. The rising sun caught the silver wings, making them shine brilliantly against the morning sky. Yesterday, you burned my future with a single match, I said, my voice dropping to a bone-chilling whisper. Today, I burn your entire life to the ground with the law. Good luck in federal prison. I pulled the phone away from my ear, completely ignoring the frantic, hysterical screaming pouring out of the tiny speaker, and pressed the red button to end the call. Without a single second of hesitation, I popped the protective tray out of the side of my phone, extracted the small plastic SIM card, and snapped it cleanly in half with my thumbnail. I tossed the broken plastic pieces directly into the silver trash can beside my chair. The explosion was complete, and I was finally walking away from the blast radius. The absolute beauty of complete destruction is the profound silence that follows. I did not have to witness the violent collapse of my family with my own eyes. The detailed letters from my former neighbor, Dr. Elias, painted a picture far more satisfying than anything I could have ever imagined. At exactly 8 o'clock on the very same morning my flight departed, a fleet of black sport utility vehicles surrounded Julian's rented commercial warehouse, according to Dr. Elias, who had watched the morning news broadcast with immense joy. Heavily armed federal agents completely shattered the steel rolling doors. Julian was forcefully dragged out into the harsh morning sunlight in heavy iron handcuffs, weeping hysterically in front of the entire neighborhood. He was immediately indicted on multiple federal charges, including grand wire fraud and international smuggling. Without my monthly paycheck to artificially prop up their lavish lifestyle, the illusion of my parents' wealth evaporated instantly. Exactly 30 days after my departure, the local bank formally initiated foreclosure proceedings on the wooden suburban cabin. Arthur and Diane were physically evicted, forced to stand on the curb with their meager belongings as a heavy chain and padlock were wrapped tightly around the front door, because I had handed the federal investigators undeniable proof of the forged mortgage documents. Both of my parents were subsequently dragged into federal court. They narrowly avoided prison time due to their old age, but they were slapped with 10 years of strict federal probation for their complicity in financial fraud. The wealthy, arrogant matriarch, who once sat at the dining table filing her nails and demanding my money is now scrubbing floors. Diane was forced to take a minimum wage job as a late-night janitor at a severely underfunded public nursing home just to afford basic groceries. Meanwhile, Arthur's health began to rapidly fail. Because I had permanently canceled his premium health insurance policy, he now spends his days sitting in crowded, freezing-free clinics, entirely unable to afford the expensive medications he desperately needs. They are trapped in a prison of their own making, drowning in the exact same crushing debt they once tried to chain permanently to my ankles. But the final, most exquisite piece of my revenge was a secret I kept entirely to myself. During those 8 agonizing months of secretly gathering digital evidence, I did not just passively observe Julian's illicit black market transactions. Utilizing my advanced skills as a senior data analyst, I discovered a massive legal loophole in the offshore routing systems his shadow creditors used. Before I permanently locked down the shell company and handed the files to the authorities, I quietly and legally diverted a significant percentage of those untraceable funds through a complex web of international corporate accounts. By the time I boarded my flight, hundreds of thousands of dollars had been meticulously laundered and legally deposited into an anonymous charitable educational trust fund, a trust fund of which I am the sole, legally protected beneficiary. Julian took all of the criminal liability, and I took the golden parachute. Today, the suffocating, gray clouds of my past in America have completely given way to the brilliant, piercing sunlight pouring through the massive glass windows of the London Medical University lecture hall. The air here smells of sterile alcohol and limitless potential. I stood silently at the head of a stainless steel dissection table for my very first advanced anatomy class. I slowly slipped my arms into the crisp, heavy sleeves of a pristine white medical coat. I looked down at my own toes, resting against the immaculate white fabric. These were the exact same hands that had been forced to wash thousands of greasy, dirty dishes. These were the hands that had mindlessly signed thousands of checks to fund the delusions of a parasitic family. But today, they were completely clean. They belonged exclusively to a future surgeon. I had finally built a brilliant, untouchable future, and this time, there was absolutely no one left who could burn it down. Thank you so genuinely to everyone for listening to today's story. We would love to know, world are you tuning in from right now? Please let us know in the comments. As a quick reminder, because our YouTube channel has been completely demonetized, we will unfortunately no longer be uploading new videos here in the near future and are transitioning our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help keep our team working, please support us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our very best, longest, and most exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you so much for your incredible support, and we will see you there.